Savannah Hart awoke early the next morning to the soft ringing of her alarm clock. It was barely light outside. The pale light of dawn filtered through the thick curtains of their spacious bedroom. The house was silent, the same stifling, wary silence she had grown accustomed to over the years of marriage. Beside her, on his side of the bed, Edward had not stirred. He was always a light sleeper, but lately he seemed to be deliberately ignoring her movements. Savannah sat down carefully on the edge of the bed, trying not to creak the springs of the mattress. For a few seconds, she looked at her husband's broad back, half covered by the blanket. Edward was breathing evenly, rhythmically, as if measuring each breath. She pulled on a light robe and quietly left the bedroom. Down the hall, past the closed door of the nursery, where their daughter Emily was still asleep, a nightlight casting flickering shadows of stuffed animals on the wall. Savannah went down to the kitchen and, with a familiar motion, pressed the button on the coffee maker. While the machine hummed, she crossed her arms over her chest and looked around. The modern kitchen, furnished in the latest fashion, seemed lifeless, like a furniture store window. Everything in this house was perfect. Not a speck of dust, not a single out-of-place thing, thanks to the housekeeper who came 3 times a week. At Edward's insistence, of course. He wanted to see order and perfection around him. The coffee maker beeped, and Savannah jumped in surprise, thinking. She took out a cup, one of the wedding cups, and poured coffee. The hot, aromatic steam tickled her nostrils, but Savannah barely tasted it. Morning coffee had long since become a mechanical ritual. Edward soon entered the kitchen, fastening his wristwatch. He was already wearing a perfectly pressed suit, and his hair was neatly combed back. His brown eyes glanced at his wife without much expression, as if checking to see if she was still in place as part of the interior. "Good morning," Savannah greeted quietly, trying to hide the timid hope for an answer in her voice. "Aha," Edward muttered. He walked over to the counter where a cup of coffee was waiting for him. Savannah put it there every day, knowing her husband's routine. He took a sip and grimaced, adding a spoonful of sugar. "Too strong today," he said, not looking at her. "I can dilute," she began, but Edward raised his hand, stopping her. "No need. I'm already late," he said dryly. He took another sip of coffee, then put the cup down. "We're having a reception at the mayor's tonight. Don't forget to wear that blue dress I gave you for your anniversary." Savannah nodded, feeling the familiar disappointment rise in her throat. He didn't care what she said as long as the order was given. She instinctively stroked the hem of her robe and asked quietly, "What time do we leave?" Edward was looking at his phone, no longer listening. A second later, he said without looking up, "Be ready at 7. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, heading to his office to gather papers before work. Savannah watched him go. When his figure disappeared behind the door, she exhaled loudly, not even realizing that she had been holding her breath the entire time. She remembered what Edward had once been like before their wedding, a young, ambitious lawyer who courted her beautifully, gave her flowers and promised to take care of her and their future family. Then she believed his every word, feeling like the most desirable. Where was that caring groom? Over time, his ardor cooled, his attention switched to his career, and instead of love, emptiness reigned in the house. Then Savannah went upstairs and quietly opened the nursery door. In the dim light of the room, she could just make out Emily's tiny form on the crib. Emily was curled up, hugging her teddy bear. Savannah's expression softened for a moment. Looking at her daughter always brought her both joy and pain. Joy from unconditional love, and pain from the knowledge that Emily's childhood was being spent in the shadow of her father's cold, distant shadow. "Wake up, sunshine," Savannah whispered, sitting on the edge of the child's bed and gently stroking her daughter's hair. "It's morning already." The girl squeezed her eyes shut and rubbed them. She was 5 years old, a perfect little copy of Savannah, with the same dark blonde curls and serious brown eyes that were now blinking sleepily. Emily rubbed her eyes and smiled when she saw her mother. "Is it morning already?" she asked in a quiet voice. "Aha," Savannah nodded and smiled back, trying to clear the sadness from her eyes. "Time to get ready for kindergarten." Emily sat up in bed and wrapped her arms tightly around her mother's neck. Savannah held her daughter close for a moment, inhaling the warm baby scent. This morning hug was the rare moment of genuine happiness she still felt within these walls. "Will Dad take me today?" Emily asked suddenly, stepping back and looking at her mother with an inquisitive look. Savannah tried to keep a smile on her face, even though her heart sank. Edward almost never took his daughter to preschool. He always had more important things to do. Today was no exception. "No, Daddy has already left for work," she explained softly, patting her daughter on the back. "Today, as usual, Mommy will take you." Emily looked down, tugging at the bear's ear. "He never eats breakfast with us," she muttered. Savannah felt a pang of pain. She tried to make sure Emily didn't feel neglected, but Emily was becoming observant. Sometimes she asked questions that Savannah couldn't find answers to. Why did Daddy come home late, or why was he so quiet? Instead of answers, Savannah only promised that Daddy loved them, although deep down she wasn't sure she believed it herself. Savannah helped her daughter choose a dress and tied her hair into two neat ponytails. After Emily brushed her teeth and washed her face, they went down to the kitchen together. Savannah made her oatmeal with berries and toast and poured orange juice. Emily sat at a high chair, swinging her legs, and occasionally glanced at the door, as if hoping that her dad would finally show up. "Mom, did you and Dad fight?" Emily asked unexpectedly, picking at her porridge with a spoon. Savannah froze, then tried to speak casually. "What makes you think that, dear?" The girl shrugged her small shoulders. "You're sad all the time, and Daddy is sad. He hardly smiles when he's at home. It's like he doesn't like being with us," she said, childishly. Savannah bit her lip to keep the pain from showing. The 5-year-old saw all too clearly what she didn't want to admit. Edward really didn't care about his family. She covered her daughter's palm with hers and said quietly, "Dad just works a lot. That's why he gets tired. He has a responsible job, he's a prosecutor. But he loves us, he just doesn't show it that often." Emily nodded, though her small face still looked doubtful. Savannah quickly changed the subject, telling them about the new coloring books she had prepared for them for the evening. It worked. The girls smiled in anticipation. The rest of breakfast passed quietly. Half an hour later, Savannah dropped her daughter off at preschool. When she got home, she stood in the hallway, leaning her back against the closed front door. The house greeted her with the same ringing silence. There was no one else here. Edward had left until late in the evening. Emily was at preschool until noon. She could do some housework, but the maid would come tomorrow and the house was in order. Savannah had nothing left to do except look forward to another evening of being an exemplary wife at a reception. She walked slowly across the living room, running her finger along the immaculate bookshelf. On one of the shelves were her literature books and teaching aids, the only thing left from her previous life, when she taught English and literature at a college. 5 years ago, right after Emily was born, she had left teaching. At first, she thought it was temporary, but Edward saw no point in his wife working. He made good money and said she should focus on her family. So the years passed, and Savannah no longer dared to return to the classroom. Her fingers hesitantly touched the spines of the books. They included favorite novels and the work of her students. She sometimes kept her best graduate essays, bound in sturdy folders. Savannah's gaze caught a familiar name on the spine of one of these folders. She carefully pulled it out. On the dark blue leather cover, in gold letters, was written, "Lucas James, Senior Thesis, 2018. Savannah froze, holding the folder in her hands. An image of a young man appeared in her mind, a tall, thin student with lively, intelligent eyes and an almost boyish smile. Lucas James, one of her most talented students that year. She remembered his thesis, a novel he had attempted to write as part of the course. It had been a rough but promising text. She had even encouraged him to continue writing. A memory came to her. Late one evening after class, Lucas had lingered shyly in the classroom, waiting for the others to leave. Then he hesitantly approached her desk with a notebook full of writing. "Mrs. Hart, will you read this?" he asked sheepishly. She remembered the excitement in his eyes when she agreed. It was a rough draft of his first chapter, crude, sometimes naive, but surprisingly sincere. He wrote about a young man going through hard times, about anger and hope. That evening, she not only gave him advice, but also praised several successful images. Lucas smiled sheepishly, clutching the strap of his backpack, and said goodbye. "You are the best teacher I've ever had." Those words had inspired her then, giving her the strength to continue inspiring kids like him. Savannah ran her hand over the name on the cover. She wondered what he had become all these years later. Had he become a writer as he had dreamed? The thought somehow warmed her inside. Once, reading his work, she had felt a rare inspiration, as if she herself had remembered her own youthful dreams of writing a book. As she thought about it, she didn't immediately notice how her heart began to beat a little faster. In the echoing silence of the mansion, the sound was almost audible. Savannah pressed the folder to her chest. For the first time in a long time, she remembered something other than everyday worries. The memory of a talented student and his passion for literature awakened in her her own long-standing feelings, the joy of communicating with a kindred spirit, the excitement of creativity. She carefully opened the folder and leafed through several pages of typewritten text. Her eyes ran over the familiar acknowledgments on the title page. "I would like to express my special gratitude to my teacher, Mrs. Hart, for her faith in me and her support." Savannah remembered how those words had touched her then. She slammed the folder shut and pressed her hand to her lips, suddenly feeling a hot lump of tears spring to her eyes. Her own life, how far it had come from the ideals she had tried to instill in her students. Where was the vibrant, inspired Mrs. Hart now, respected and even loved by her students? Only the prosecutor's wife remained, a shadow in a luxurious house where no one could hear her heart. Savannah took a deep breath, holding back tears. After all, she had to put on the mask of a happy wife at the reception today. Like always. That evening, Savannah did her usual duty. She smiled and remained silent next to her husband at the mayor's reception. Her blue dress hugged her figure, her pearl necklace glittered softly on her neck from the outside. She looked like an elegant and contented woman. Edward introduced her to the right people, noted her beauty as another of his virtues. But there was almost no real communication between them, only rehearsed phrases and routine smiles. Savannah felt like a doll in a shop window. At one point, standing with a glass of champagne just behind her husband, she caught snippets of his conversation with the county judge. "That guy got what he deserved, 10 years without parole," Edward said with satisfaction in his voice. The judge nodded approvingly, and the mayor clapped Edward on the shoulder. "Good job, Hart. The city can sleep soundly while you take care of business." Edward smiled back, confidently and modestly at the same time, the chiseled mask of a principled defender of the law. Savannah looked at her husband from the side and barely recognized him. This charismatic, witty man, the public's favorite, seemed like a completely different person than the one who coldly distanced himself from her at home. It suddenly occurred to her, was he ever himself next to her? Or was he always playing a role, sometimes a loving groom, sometimes a model husband now? The thought was bitter, and she hastened to drive it away, putting on a welcoming smile again. Edward hadn't bothered to ask her how her day had been all evening, hadn't noticed her red eyes. Even when they got home well after midnight, he hadn't noticed that Savannah was unusually quiet. He'd quickly changed and gone to bed without another word, and she'd lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling where the reflections of the city lights danced, thinking about the blue leather folder and the name that glittered on its cover. Lucas James. In the morning, after seeing Emily off to kindergarten, Savannah returned home and almost immediately headed to her small office on the second floor. It was a cozy room where she once graded students' papers and wrote lesson plans. Over the past few years, the office had been gathering dust without being used. But today, Savannah felt excited. Her heart was beating faster at the thought that had been bothering her since the previous day. She wanted to know what had happened to Lucas. Savannah turned on her laptop and sat down at her desk. She had to search through her memory, but soon she remembered she had changed her email after getting married and lost many of her old contacts. The internet remembered, though. She typed the name Lucas James into the search bar. Within seconds, the results appeared on the screen. Savannah leaned in closer, scanning the headlines. There were several mentions of a writer by that name. Lucas James has unveiled his debut novel, she read in one of the results, and eagerly clicked on the link. A literary blog with an interview opened. Savannah began to read greedily. It turned out that Lucas had indeed published his first novel 2 years ago, which had received positive reviews from critics in some literary magazines. The book did not become a bestseller, but the author was called a promising young writer. In the interview, Lucas talked about how he had been hatching the idea for the book since his student years. He noted that in college, one professor inspired him to continue writing. Lucas also mentioned how he worked on the manuscript in the evenings while working at the newspaper editorial office during the day. From the lines of the article, it was as if his confident voice, matured but still passionate, reached Savannah. She scrolled down. There was a photo. Savannah held her breath, looking at it. It was of a young man in his mid-20s. Lucas had matured. His features had become stronger. There was a light stubble on his chin. But his eyes were the same, deep and expressive. He looked straight into the camera and smiled slightly at the corner of his lips, like a man who knew the value of both defeats and victories. Savannah's heart sank for a moment. She desperately wanted to talk to him, to find out more. After all, she had once believed in him, and she was right. He had managed to make her dream come true. With trembling fingers, she found the official website associated with his name. There was a news item. Lucas James was holding a book reading at the Central City Library this week. The date was the following Wednesday. The time was 2 p.m. Savannah noted that this was a time when Emily would still be in preschool and Edward would be at work. She had no marital obligations scheduled for this hour. She felt a sudden surge of determination. On Wednesday afternoon, Savannah left the house for the first time in months, not on family business. She parked outside the Central Library building and felt her knees shaking. She felt as if everyone passing by could see right through her and know what she was up to. But what was so wrong, she reassured herself, just meeting a former student, rejoicing in his success. After all, she had always thought this boy would go far. Savannah entered the library's spacious reading room and saw a group of people gathered there, no more than 30. In front of them was a table with a speaker sitting behind it. She recognized Lucas immediately, the same tall, thin figure. He was now wearing a dark blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He was reading aloud from a page in front of him, his voice echoing off the high ceiling of the room. Savannah walked quietly along the wall and leaned against it, trying not to attract attention. Lucas was reading a chapter from his new book. It was a tense scene of a father saying goodbye to his son in a prison cell. Savannah listened with bated breath. The words touched her deeply. There was such pain and tenderness in the text that she couldn't help but imagine how she would feel if she was deprived of the opportunity to see Emily. A lump rose in her throat, and her eyes stung with tears. The applause brought her to her senses. The reading was over. Lucas stood up, nodded gratefully to the audience. A short question session began, but Savannah barely heard them. She was still under the impression of what she had heard. At some point, Lucas glanced around the room, and Savannah felt his gaze slide over her. He narrowed his eyes slightly, and then suddenly smiled briefly, almost imperceptibly, but this gesture was addressed to her. Savannah's heart skipped a beat. He recognized her. After the meeting ended, people started approaching for autographs. Savannah stood hesitantly to the side. She suddenly became afraid. Had she done the right thing by coming? So many years have passed. Perhaps he had already forgotten her. But no, the moment of their silent recognition gave him confidence that he had not forgotten. When the last listeners left, Lucas put down his pen and approached her himself. A welcoming and at the same time slightly embarrassed smile played on his face. "Mrs. Hart," he said quietly, as if he couldn't quite believe his eyes. Savannah smiled, suddenly feeling awkward, as if she were a teacher again, and this was a student. "Call me Savannah, please. And oh, hello, Lucas." "What a meeting," he smiled broadly now, and she recognized that boyish smile. "I didn't expect to see you. How did you end up here?" She shrugged, feeling her cheeks warm. I saw the meeting posted and had to come, Savannah smiled. Plus, that bit you read, it was amazing. I almost cried. Lucas looked down, embarrassed, but it was clear that he was pleased. Thank you. This is a chapter from my new novel, a very personal thing. I'm glad it touched you. And of course, I wanted to make sure that my most talented student became a celebrity, she added playfully. Lucas chuckled softly. I'm far from famous, but I'm glad you came. All these years, you haven't changed at all, he added, looking at her carefully. Savannah was embarrassed by his intense gaze. She felt like she had lost the sparkle of youth over the years, but there was genuine admiration in Lucas's eyes. Oh, time spares no one, she waved him off with a slight smile. But you've become so mature. I recognized you at the table right away. I read your interview, you've accomplished a lot. I tried, he smiled, running his hand through his hair. But your lessons and support really helped me. By the way, I always remembered you with gratitude. Really, Savannah herself felt the warmth spreading through her chest at those words. I accidentally found your thesis the other day. Remember, the novel you started writing in your senior year. I still have that folder. Lucas's eyes lit up. Seriously? I thought you were way past that. I mean, he trailed off, perhaps remembering that she had a family and another life. Anyway, I'm glad you kept it. Of course I did, she said softly. I always believed in you. Lucas looked at her with warmth. Savannah felt a little dizzy from the rush of emotions. No one had spoken to her so openly and sincerely for a long time. These few minutes of conversation brought her back to her former self. She suddenly realized that she did not want to leave at all. But the clock was approaching 3 o'clock. Soon she would have to pick up Emily. Listen, Lucas said hesitantly, let's have a coffee sometime and talk calmly. Because right now, as you know, there's a lot of fuss. I'd really like to know how your life turned out. Savannah looked down. What could she say? About a happy marriage that was a lie. About a child that was probably a joy. But she felt a strong desire to talk to someone who understood. Yeah, go ahead, she said, feeling both dread and anticipation. Maybe tomorrow. I have time this morning. Great. Do you know the Riverside Cafe on Broadway? Let's go there at, say, 10 a.m. I know. At 10 a.m., she confirmed. They exchanged phone numbers, and as they said goodbye, Lucas suddenly timidly touched her elbow. This fleeting gesture sent a slight jolt down Savannah's spine, so unusual was someone else's warm touch. She had forgotten the last time she felt something like this. I'm glad to meet you, he said softly. See you tomorrow, Savannah. She nodded, at a loss for words. As she stepped out of the library onto the sunny street, her cheeks were flushed and a smile played on her lips. A long-forgotten feeling began to beat in her chest: excitement, hope. The past, carefully preserved in the leather cover of an old file, came to life and opened the door to the future for her. The Riverside Cafe greeted Savannah with warmth and the aroma of freshly baked croissants. She walked inside at exactly 10 a.m., feeling her heart pricking with excitement. Lucas was already waiting for her at one of the tables by the window. He stood up when she appeared, a genuine smile on his face. The large window where they had settled in showed the slow flow of morning passers-by. Inside, soft music was playing, and there were almost no people around. I was afraid you'd change your mind, Lucas said with relief as they exchanged greetings and sat down opposite each other. No, I wanted to come, Savannah admitted, taking off her coat. She was wearing a light blue dress with a cardigan over it. In the mirror at home, she thought she looked too dressed up for a casual morning at a cafe, but Lucas's eyes were glowing with approval, and she relaxed inwardly. I'm glad we can talk in peace. Me too, he said softly. The waitress came over, and they ordered. Savannah got a latte, and Lucas got a black coffee. There was a moment of silence. Savannah noticed that Lucas was looking at her, not as a man might size up a woman, but rather as if he were trying to read her mood. You look a little tired, he began carefully. I hope I wasn't too pushy in asking you to meet. What? No, it's okay, she smiled quickly. Sorry, I guess I really am tired. The last few years haven't been the easiest. Lucas inclined his head, as if urging her to continue. His gaze was filled with genuine concern. Savannah felt a wave of frankness rising inside her. She suddenly really wanted to tell this attentive young man everything that had accumulated in her soul. But she held back, not wanting to spill her problems on a man with whom she had just renewed her acquaintance. It's all banal, she said with a slight smile. I got married, had a daughter, quit teaching. In short, I became an exemplary wife and mother. Lucas listened attentively without interrupting, but she noticed a shadow of regret in his eyes. You don't teach anymore? Too bad. You had such a talent for teaching. Many missed you when you left. Really? Savannah raised her eyebrows in surprise. She had rarely heard sincere praise in recent years. I sometimes miss it too. But that's how it happened. Edward, my husband, thought it was unnecessary. He wanted me to take care of the house and the baby. And my pregnancy was difficult. I had to go on maternity leave early. I understand, Lucas said softly. What does your husband do? He's the district attorney, Savannah said, stirring her latte. You may have heard of Edward Hart. Lucas raised his eyebrows slightly, recognition flickering across his face. Hart. Yeah, sure, I've heard of him, he said evenly, though his fingers around the cup were white. He's pretty famous. Savannah nodded, feeling the familiar bitter taste of her husband's topic. Yeah, he loves his job. You could say he's more married to it than he is to me, she said, a bitter confession she hadn't allowed out loud before. She immediately became embarrassed. I'm sorry, I don't know why I... It's okay, Lucas said quietly, looking her straight in the eyes. Sometimes it's good to talk, and I'm glad if you trust me. Savannah felt warmth at his words. She really did feel safe around him, able to say things she usually kept quiet. Her own words seemed to penetrate her skin, revealing truths she was used to hiding. She looked down at her teacup. Edward just has very strict views. He's used to controlling everyone, both at home and at work. Sometimes I feel like I live on a schedule where every step is predetermined, and there's no space for myself. Lucas nodded silently. His gaze darkened, his lips tightened. I'm sorry you feel like you're in a gilded cage, he said quietly. You don't deserve this. Savannah's nose suddenly stung with tears, so understanding was in his voice. She quickly pulled herself together, taking a sip of coffee. Let's not talk about me, she asked, her voice slightly hoarse. Tell me about yourself. You mentioned you worked at a newspaper. Lucas studied her face for a moment, as if considering whether to ask further questions. But then he leaned back, leaning back in his chair. Okay, my life in a nutshell. After college, I did go to work as a journalist for a local newspaper. They paid pennies there, but I had a good experience. At the same time, I was writing my novel in the evenings. You've already seen it on sale. I lived with my parents then, helping my mother, my father. Lucas hesitated for a moment. He died a few years ago. Oh, I'm sorry, Savannah whispered sincerely. I'm so sorry. Lucas nodded, looking away. Thank you. He's had a hard time these last few years. But let's not talk about that. He tried to smile, although it came out sad. After the book was published, things started to improve. I was noticed, offered a contract for a second novel. I moved to another apartment. Now I live alone and write almost full-time. That's wonderful, Savannah said, glad the conversation had turned to a more neutral topic. You're going after your dream. I'm so proud of you. Lucas was a little embarrassed and smiled gratefully. You deserve some credit for that, really. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't supported me then. Maybe I would have given up writing and would now be doing something I don't like somewhere in an office. I was just doing my job, she said softly. No, it's not simple, he shook his head. You did so much more. You know, not all teachers see students as people with dreams. For many, we're just another stream. And you believed in me then, and that gave me strength. Savannah felt Lucas's words sink right under her skin, a warm, piercing feeling. No one had said anything like that to her in a long time. She smiled shyly. I'm very pleased to hear that. It means it was worth it to me to become a teacher. They fell silent, and a special feeling hung in the quiet of the cozy cafe, as if they had shared something intimate. A ray of sunlight fell through the large window onto the table, highlighting the golden sparkles in Savannah's hair. Lucas noticed this and suddenly said quietly, "You're beautiful, you know," Lucas suddenly said quietly. Savannah was taken aback. Edward hadn't said anything like that to her in years. She blinked in surprise. Her cheeks flushed. "I'm afraid I'm not in the best shape after years of motherhood and housekeeping," she said, half jokingly, just to hide her embarrassment. "You are beautiful," he repeated seriously, without looking away. "More mature than before, but you still have the same beauty and intelligence and sadness," he added after a pause. She looked down, playing with her empty cup. "I guess every age has its own," she tried to wave him off. But her chest ached sweetly from his words. For the next half hour, they talked about a little bit of everything literature, their favorite books. It turned out that they both loved Stephen King stories and could spend hours discussing psychological plots. Lucas made her laugh by recalling how in college he desperately tried to write a term paper on Joyce and got lost in streams of consciousness. Savannah gave him an out of admiration for his persistence. She laughed heartily, feeling at ease for the first time in a long time. They also discussed their own creative ideas. It turned out that Savannah had also tried writing stories before she got married, but she had thought they were unsuccessful and abandoned them. Lucas enthusiastically asked her about her ideas, and Savannah's eyes lit up with a long-forgotten passion. She recounted one of her old ideas about a woman who lives on other people's expectations and one day decides to break free. As she spoke, Lucas listened with bated breath, and then suddenly said, "This is an incredibly powerful topic. You must write this book, Savannah." "Do you think so?" She was even confused by his confident tone. "I'm sure," Lucas nodded and smiled, touching her hand lying on the table with his fingertips. "Please, promise that you'll at least try to write again. You have talent, it can't be buried." The light touch sent shivers down Savannah's spine. She wanted to promise him anything, just so he would continue to look at her like that, with faith and warmth. "Okay, I'll try," she said, almost in a whisper. Lucas beamed and squeezed her fingers a little tighter before letting go. "That's great. If you ever need a reader or advice, I'm here. You can send me anything you write, okay?" Savannah nodded, feeling both happy and embarrassed by the support. Lucas smiled contentedly and pulled his hand away, giving her time to recover. The waitress casually asked if they wanted anything else, and Savannah suddenly realized that more than an hour had passed. She didn't want to leave. This conversation had brought her back to life. But duty called. She needed to stop for groceries and get home before Edward returned. They left the cafe together. On the sidewalk, Savannah hesitated for a second, unsure of how to say goodbye. But Lucas himself suggested, "Maybe we can meet again this week, if you don't mind." Savannah felt her heart clench with joy. She tried not to sound too enthusiastic, but her voice was animated. "I don't mind. That would be great. Then I'll call or write. We'll agree," he promised. "And thank you for a wonderful morning. It's been a long time since I've had such a pleasant conversation." Savannah smiled back. "Thank you. It was really good for me too." They exchanged a warm look, then hesitantly hugged goodbye. The hug was short and a little awkward, but Savannah felt the warmth of his arms on her shoulders as she walked to the car. It was as if the invisible words Lucas had spoken were still living beneath her skin, supporting and burning at the same time. The following weeks turned into a series of secret meetings and correspondence for Savannah, which no one close to her knew about. In the mornings, she woke up impatiently, knowing that a new message from Lucas was waiting for her on her phone, a short, "Good morning, have a wonderful day," or a link to an interesting article about literature. These few lines set the tone for the entire day. Savannah responded to him while making coffee or parking at the kindergarten, a few warm words, a smiley. Sometimes she sent a photo of a blossoming tree she passed by. Their correspondence flowed freely, easily, as if they had known each other all their lives. To play it safe, Savannah guarded every message. As soon as her phone screen went dark, she immediately deleted the correspondence, leaving her heart to store everything that was not stored in the device's memory. Letters that were not there, that's what she called these messages to herself, because no one was ever supposed to see them. But that only made them more valuable to her. They met whenever possible when Edward was busy at work and Emily had classes or children's parties. Once, the night before, Savannah told her husband that her classmates were meeting in town. Edward shrugged indifferently. "Suit yourself. Just don't come back too late." Savannah's heart sank at how easily he let her go as if he didn't care. That evening, she spent a few delightful hours with Lucas in a small art cafe. There was a jazz band playing, and under the dim light of the lamps, they sat in a corner, quietly talking to the gentle sounds of a saxophone. At one point, Lucas took her hand under the table, and she did not pull it away. These were innocent gestures, but they made Savannah's heart sing as loudly as the musicians on stage. Another day, after telling her housekeeper she was going to pick up a special gift for Edward, she slipped away for a couple of hours to the park, where Lucas read aloud to her from his new novel. They lay on a plaid blanket beneath a spreading oak tree, Lucas's soft voice mingling with the rustling of the leaves overhead. Savannah closed her eyes, listening to the story of hope lost and regained, each word seeming to resonate with her own soul. Savannah laughed, argued, shared, and felt as if she were reliving her youth when the world was full of possibilities. Something she both feared and longed for had begun to grow between them. One evening, lying in bed next to Edward, who was quietly snoring and, as usual, had turned away from her immediately after he got into bed, Savannah could not fall asleep. She turned on her side, away from her husband, and stared into the darkness. A longing, mixed with a sweet thrill, flared up in her chest. She wanted so much to write Lucas a long letter now to tell him that meeting him had become her salvation, that his every look, his every word meant more to her than he could imagine, that she fell asleep and woke up thinking about him. Savannah carefully crawled out from under the covers, trying not to disturb her husband, and tiptoed out of the bedroom. Night had fallen over the house, but a faint yellow light was coming from the refrigerator in the kitchen downstairs. She sat down at the table and pulled out a notepad and pen from the shelf. After making sure Edward's footsteps didn't disturb the silence, Savannah began to write, letting out everything that was clamoring for her soul. "Dear Lucas, I can't bring myself to tell you all this in person, but I have to admit it, at least on paper. Meeting you has changed me. I feel alive, as if I woke up from a long sleep. You give me back myself, the one I lost many years ago. I am both happy and scared by these feelings. Happy because I can smile and dream again. Scared because I have no right to this joy. Sometimes I wish I could turn back time and meet you when we were both free. But you can't change the past. We only have this fragile moment of the present, and I'm grateful to you for every minute that you're near, even if secretly. I don't know what will happen next, and if our friendship has a future. Forgive me for calling it friendship. I'm afraid to give feelings another name. But no, Lucas, you are dear to me, dearer than anyone in many years. Thank you for being in my life. Yours is." She put down her pen, feeling her heart pounding. The lines blurred before her eyes. Only now did she notice the tears, large drops rolling down onto the paper. Savannah brushed them away with a trembling hand. She felt a little better, at least she had let out what was languishing inside. But she was not going to send this letter. As soon as dawn touched the sky with gray light, Savannah tore up the written pages and threw them in the trash, trying not to wake either her husband or the ghost of her own conscience. The next day, they agreed to meet in the afternoon at a small art museum in the city. Savannah had said at home that she was going to the exhibition. There was nothing suspicious about it. She had gone to museums alone before, when she wanted to take her mind off things. Lucas was waiting for her at the entrance. It was a warm, sunny day, and they decided to first take a stroll through the park next to the museum, fragrant with spring flowers. Savannah walked along the gravel path next to Lucas, their hands brushing lightly every now and then. She felt the familiar excitement rising in her chest. After the night before, when she had confessed her feelings to herself on paper, being around him had become both easier and harder at the same time. It was as if she had dropped a mask, even though Lucas knew nothing about the letter. But inside, she had accepted the truth. She could no longer deceive herself. This was more than just friendship. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, looking into her face with a smile. Savannah smiled back, trying to hide her confusion. "Oh, nothing special. It's just beautiful here. Spring is in full swing." Lucas nodded and suddenly touched her arm lightly, stopping. "You know, there's something I wanted to tell you, Savannah." Everything inside her broke. She turned to him. He looked serious, even tense. Birds were chirping around. A child was laughing somewhere. But for her, for a moment, everything was quiet. "What? What is it?" she said, feeling her throat go dry. Lucas looked away for a second, as if collecting his thoughts, then met her eyes again. "The thing is, I'm sorry if this sounds weird, but I think about you all the time. I look forward to our meetings. I reread your messages dozens of times. It's not enough for me to just talk about books or go for walks anymore. I want to know everything about you, what makes you happy or sad, what you dream about. Savannah, I think I'm—" He paused, then exhaled. "I'm in love with you." Savannah froze like a bolt from the blue. She had been waiting for these words, dreading them, and wanting them all at once. Her heart was pounding so fast she thought Lucas could hear it. She needed to say something, but her throat was tight. "I'm sorry," he quickly added, noticing her confusion. "If I embarrassed you, if it's one-sided, I just can't bear to hide it anymore." She met his gaze and shook her head. "No, no need to apologize. You're not mistaken, Lucas," she whispered at last, feeling her cheeks flush hotly. "I feel it too. I feel it all." Now it was his turn to be surprised. Lucas looked at her, and his face lit up with hope. They were standing very close. Savannah could no longer remember who was the first to cover the last centimeters between them. Lucas carefully hugged her shoulders and leaned down. Her eyes closed on their own, and the next moment his lips softly touched hers. Time stood still. Savannah felt a shiver run through her body from shock, from happiness, from a sharp sense of wrongness, and at the same time truth of what was happening. His kiss was gentle, a little hesitant, as if he was afraid to scare her away. She responded, timidly moving her lips in time. Her heart was beating somewhere in her throat. Her legs were slightly wobbly. She didn't know how long this sweet moment lasted, a second, an eternity. When they pulled away, both were breathing a little heavily. Savannah looked up at Lucas. There were so many emotions splashing in them that she couldn't find the words. "Savannah," he muttered, still holding her in his arms. She quietly put her finger to his lips, not letting him finish. Words were unnecessary now. She only knew that she wanted and feared this step, and now there was no turning back. In the reflection of his eyes, she saw her own happiness and pain at the same time. They never went to the museum. Instead, they walked around the city for most of the day, holding hands. They exchanged glances and smiles every now and then, but they never said another word about the kiss. They didn't need words. Everything had already been said. But when it was time to go back, anxiety crept into Savannah's soul. She gave free rein to her heart and thereby crossed the line. Now she will have to see in the mirror not just an unhappy wife, but also a woman who committed betrayal. Savannah quietly closed the bathroom door behind her and turned the bolt. She turned on the light and was startled by her own pallor. In the mirror opposite her stood a woman with disheveled hair and red eyes. It was herself, and yet somehow alien, like a ghost of the old Savannah. The taste of a recent kiss still lingered on her lips, and a mixture of guilt and delight danced in her pupils. She ran her palm over the cool surface of the sink, trying to calm the trembling in her fingers. The evening was unbearable. Returning home after Lucas kissed her, Savannah immediately rushed to the shower, hoping to wash away the feeling of betrayal. But no matter how much she rubbed her skin, it remained not as a mark on the body, but as a stamp on her mind. She barely raised her eyes during dinner. Edward seemed not to notice anything. He was discussing work matters on the phone right at the table. Emily cheerfully told her about the day at the kindergarten, and Savannah forced herself to smile at her daughter, to assent, but she felt like a puppet, mechanically playing out a familiar scene of Family Idol. Now, hiding in the bathtub, she allowed herself to shrink under the weight of the emotions that had fallen upon her. She had cheated on her husband. The word throbbed in her temples, hitting her chest with every passing second. Yes, just a kiss. But isn't that where betrayal begins? Savannah sank onto the edge of the bathtub and covered her face with her hands. Emily's face floated before her mind's eye, the innocent face of a daughter who believed that mom and dad would always be together. Just think, she had read a fairy tale to a child in the morning, and in the afternoon she had thrown herself into the arms of another man. Who was she after that? Was she a good mother? She wanted to howl with shame. But when she closed her eyes, instead of the accusing gaze of conscience, she saw other eyes, the warm, understanding eyes of Lucas. Instead of disgust, she felt a sweet shiver from the memory of his lips, of the trepidation with which he said, "I am in love with you." And how she, despite all the horror of the situation, whispered back that she loved him too. These words were quiet, but they became the most honest confession in her life for many years. Savannah lowered her hands from her face and looked into the mirror again. In its depths, she seemed to sense movement, as if a shadow was standing behind her. She turned around, but there was no one in the empty bathroom. Only her own reflection, alien and accusing, looked with cold intentness. There was a soft knock on the bathroom door. "Savannah, will you be there soon?" Edward's voice came, slightly irritated. "I need to wash up." "Yes, a minute," she said hoarsely. Savannah splashed water on her face, trying to wipe away the traces of her tears. When she left, Edward glanced at her. "Are you okay?" he asked casually. "My head hurts," she answered quietly, avoiding his gaze. "I'll take some pills and go to bed early." Edward nodded indifferently, "As you wish." No suspicions, he didn't even give her an anxious glance. Apparently, thoughts of work left him no time to notice his wife's metamorphosis. Savannah went into the bedroom and lay down, trying to breathe evenly. Half an hour later, Edward lay down next to her and turned off the light, without asking anything. And she lay there for a long time, her eyes open in the darkness, afraid of her own thoughts. She woke up the next morning with a heavy heart. Edward had already left. He was scheduled to travel to a neighboring city for a 2-day trial. Savannah felt both relief and fear. Relief that she wouldn't have to lie to her husband about her affairs, and fear because now there was nothing to stop her from seeing Lucas. She picked up the phone. Several messages from Lucas had been waiting for her since the evening. He was worried if she was okay, asked her not to be scared, and that he loved her. Savannah pressed the phone to her chest, closing her eyes. Her soul was torn between two forces, duty and feeling, but she desperately wanted to see Lucas. She didn't answer him right away. After seeing Emily off to kindergarten, Savannah spent half the day aimlessly wandering around the shops, trying to distract herself. But closer to lunch, she dialed Lucas's number. He picked up the phone almost immediately. "Savannah, thank God. I was worried," he breathed out instead of greeting. "I'm sorry." She didn't know where to begin. Her throat tightened again with guilt and joy at hearing his voice. We need to talk." "Yes, of course. Can you come to my place? It will be calmer for us than in the city," he suggested carefully. "If you don't want to, let's do it somewhere else, but I would like us to take our time." Savannah pictured his empty apartment and herself walking in alone. Her heart thumped against her ribs. It meant crossing another line. But yesterday she had already crossed the line that had stopped her before. What difference would the meeting place make? "Okay," she heard herself answer quietly. "I can do it during the day. Edward has been gone for 2 days." "I know," Lucas blurted out. He quickly added, I assumed. He told the press he was leaving for the trial. Come whenever it's convenient for you. I'll be waiting." Savannah was a little surprised by Lucas's knowledge of her husband's affairs, but she didn't pay any attention to it. It seemed to her that everyone around her was watching her, although in fact only the two of them knew about her secret. Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, she parked near the house where Lucas rented an apartment. It turned out to be a modest two-story house divided into several apartments on a quiet street in the center. Lucas was already waiting at the entrance and immediately hurried to meet her. He barely resisted the urge to hug her on the street, just a touch on the elbow and a look full of tenderness. Savannah came inside, and he closed the door behind them. The small living room of his apartment was cozy and simple. Bookshelves along the walls, a blanket on the sofa, a mug with the handle upside down on the table. Apparently, he had just finished his coffee. For a moment, there was an awkward silence. "I'm glad you came," Lucas finally said quietly. "I was afraid you wouldn't want to see me anymore." Savannah stood by the window, not knowing what to do with her hands. "I didn't know myself. I thought about it all night. I'm so ashamed, Lucas. I'm a terrible woman." "Don't say that, please," he quickly interrupted, coming closer. "You're not terrible. You're alive, just alive. You deserve love and happiness." "But I'm betraying my family," she whispered, feeling a lump in her throat. "What about Emily? What am I doing?" Lucas took her hands gently. "You're a wonderful mother. You don't do anything against your daughter. You give her a happy, smiling mother. Hasn't she noticed how you've changed for the better lately?" Savannah was silent, remembering her daughter's shining eyes. Emily was truly happy about her good mood. "But it's still wrong," she said in a weak voice. "All my life I've considered betrayal to be the worst thing that can happen between spouses. And now I myself." "Sometimes life is more complicated than our principles," Lucas objected softly. "You've been unhappy for so many years. Why should you deny yourself the right to be happy? Is it fair that Edward lives as he wants, doesn't deny himself anything, and you are like a shadow next to him? Does he value your loyalty? He didn't even notice." Lucas hesitated. Savannah looked up at him. "What, you didn't notice?" Lucas let go of her hands and stepped back, running his hand through his hair. "Nothing. I didn't mean to speak ill of him. I'm sorry. It's just that I see how he treats you. You deserve to be treated differently." She sighed. There was truth in his words, no matter how bitter it was to admit. Edward had not noticed her worries, her loneliness. And now there was a man who noticed and loved her. Savannah took a step toward Lucas and timidly leaned against him, pressing her forehead to his chest. He immediately hugged her, stroking her back. They stood there for several minutes, the only sound being their breathing. Finally, Savannah lifted her face. Lucas's gaze was so warm, without a trace of judgment or lust, only love and tenderness. She thought she had never seen a man look at her with such concern. She rose up on her toes and touched her lips to his neck, feeling him freeze in surprise. "Savannah," he whispered, sliding his fingers down her cheek. She didn't answer with words, but with a kiss, cautious at first, then more and more passionate. Lucas pulled her closer to him, his hands gliding tremulously down her back. A wave of desire washed over them both, an attraction they had held back for too long. Savannah drowned in the kiss, letting her feelings take over her reason. He carried her carefully to the couch. Her heart was pounding, but there was no longer any fear, only a burning, frantic desire for closeness. Lucas showered her face and neck with gentle kisses. His palm trembled, caressing her waist. Savannah felt herself melting with every touch. Her clothes slid to the floor, and now she was in his arms, defenseless, desired. Not a single doubt remained in her thoughts, only love, only him. When it was all over, they lay there for a long time, their arms intertwined, silently listening to their hearts beating. Savannah pressed her forehead to his shoulder, her eyelids heavy with the languor that had washed over her. Lucas kissed the top of her head. The moment seemed perfect, but gradually reality came back to haunt her. Savannah couldn't help herself. She stood up and put on the nightgown that Lucas carefully picked up from the floor and handed to her. She looked around. In the mirrored window opposite, Their dim reflections were visible. Her hair was tousled, her cheeks were flushed red. Lucas was looking at her with concern. She realized the shadows of doubt had settled on her face again. "Do you regret it again?" he asked quietly. She shook her head, trying to force a smile. "No, I don't regret it. It's just, I need to go home." Lucas nodded, watching her as she got dressed. He stopped her at the door, squeezing her shoulders. "I love you. Please don't torture yourself with this. We'll get through this." Savannah couldn't help but feel tears in her eyes. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I love you too, Lucas. A lot, but I'm scared." He pulled her to his chest, kissing her temples. "I know. Me too. But I'm with you. Do you hear me? I won't leave you." She nodded, wiping away tears. A few minutes later, Savannah stepped outside. The sun was blinding her eyes. People were passing by, unaware of how her life had turned upside down. She felt someone's gaze on her from afar. She shuddered, but did not see anyone familiar. Only her own reflection in the window of a nearby store looked at her with disapproval. Savannah turned away and hurried to the car, as if running from a ghost that was chasing her on her heels. That same evening, on his way home, another man looked in the mirror, the rearview mirror of his old sedan, parked in front of Lucas's house. Savannah's car flashed in the reflection as it drove away. Behind the wheel of the sedan sat a private detective hired by Edward Hart. He pulled out a camera with a telephoto lens and snapped a few shots, preserving evidence that the district attorney's wife had spent the day in a completely different place than she was supposed to. Savannah was putting Emily to bed when she heard the front door open. Her heart skipped a beat. Edward wasn't due back until tomorrow. She stepped out onto the landing and froze as her husband walked upstairs, suitcase in hand. His face was expressionless. "Are you home already?" she asked cautiously, trying to sound casually surprised. "The business trip was postponed," he answered shortly. No smile, no usual kiss. Edward's gaze slid over her like an icy, aiming beam. Savannah felt her insides tighten. He knew something her heart told her. "Emily's already in bed," she said, swallowing, trying to break the silence. "Have you eaten? I can heat up dinner." "No need," he snapped. He put the suitcase against the wall and slowly took off his jacket. "Better tell me how you spent today." The simple question sounded like an interrogation. Savannah swallowed hard. "I was at the museum. Remember I said," she heard herself say, her voice strained. Edward nodded, throwing his jacket over the railing. "Right, the art museum, right? I wonder if you liked the exhibit." "Yes, very much," she answered quickly, too quickly. He took a step closer, and she involuntarily retreated. Her husband's gaze made her back away, although he did not even raise his hand. "You're not lying?" he asked evenly. "You don't want to lie to me, Savannah?" Her throat went dry. Fragments of today instantly appeared before her eyes. The unmade bed in Lucas's apartment, his hot whisper in her ear, their kisses by the window. The blood drained from her face. Edward, what happened?" she asked quietly, with difficulty pronouncing the words. Her husband stared at her, like a predator at its prey. He slowly pulled an envelope from his coat pocket. "There's something interesting in here," he muttered, shaking the contents at her feet. Photographs fell to the floor. Savannah glanced at them, and the world shook. He had hired surveillance, no doubt about it. She recognized herself in the glossy photographs. She and Lucas, leaving his door today, the same ones, walking hand in hand down the sidewalk. Her car at a stranger's house. Savannah felt her legs buckle. She leaned back against the wall, looking at the incriminating images. "Edward," she began in a weak voice. He stepped closer, and she shrank back in animal terror. His face was distorted with anger, but he spoke quietly. "Be quiet, Savannah," Edward hissed almost silently, but this angry whisper made her tremble even more. "I don't need your lying explanations. Everything is clear." She closed her eyes, tears burning them. "Forgive me, forgive me." She breathed out, realizing that excuses were pointless. "Forgive me. Her husband's voice broke into a hoarse laugh. "Are you apologizing?" he asked angrily. Never before had Edward allowed himself to touch her with such fury. Panic terror paralyzed her body. "How dare you, you pathetic bitch?" He grabbed her chin, forcing her to raise her head. "I gave you everything, and you disgraced me." "Edward, please!" she sobbed, clinging to his wrist with her hand, but his grip only tightened. "Did you think I wouldn't find out anything? Did you think you could hang out with whoever you wanted while I worked day and night?" He hissed in her face. "Who is he? Or rather, what did he tell you? Love? Warmth? Emotions?" Edward grinned evilly. "That little writer was just making fun of you." Savannah shook her head, trying to break free. "No, you don't understand," she muttered. Edward bared his teeth. "I don't understand. You're the one who doesn't understand anything, fool. Your precious boy initially pursued one goal: to take revenge on me. Can you guess for what? No, that's it. Let me explain. His daddy is Michael James. Do you remember his name? That swindler whom I put behind bars for 10 years. He died in prison, as befits a dirty, corrupt official. And now the son has decided to fight for the honor of the family. Funny, right?" Savannah stopped struggling, looking at her husband with wide eyes. The words echoed like thunder in her head. Revenge. Daddy. Michael James. She had heard that name, maybe on the news or from Edward himself a long time ago. But she couldn't believe it. Lucas knew her husband, deliberately sought out a meeting. No, it was impossible. It was a lie. "You don't believe me?" Edward grinned, seeing her shock. "You can ask your lover. Although I doubt that after this night he will hang out with you again. He did his job, he blackened me, trampled you. You understand that now you will become a laughing stock. The wife of a famous prosecutor, having an affair with a former student. Tomorrow all the newspapers will know about it, if I want." He finally released her chin, throwing her away. Her jaw throbbed with pain from his fingers. Savannah staggered, but managed to stay on her feet. Her chest was burning with sobs, but fear for Emily gave her the strength to speak. "Please, don't. Don't ruin Emily's life. I'll do whatever you say," she stammered through her tears. "Punish me, but don't drag my daughter into it." Edward looked down at her coldly. "It's too late, Savannah. You ruined her life. Were you thinking about your daughter when you went to bed with that guy? No? Well, don't use her as a cover now," he snapped. "I'm filing for divorce tomorrow. And rest assured, Emily will stay with me. The judge will be glad to hear what a model mother you are." Savannah's feet sank. She slid down the wall to the floor, covering her face with her shaking hands. "Edward, Edward, please, don't take my daughter away from me," she begged silently. But instead of sympathy, she heard footsteps. Her husband was leaving, stepping loudly over the scattered photographs. He paused for a moment in the bedroom doorway and said over his shoulder, "You don't have a single chance against me, mind you. If you obediently do everything I say, I might let you see Emily a couple of times a month. If you try to resist, I'll destroy you. And that brat too. As a prosecutor, I promise there'll be a place for him. Don't even think about saving or feeling sorry for anyone. Think about yourself." The door slammed. Edward retreated to his office, leaving her on the cold floor. Tears ran down her cheeks, dripping onto the discarded photographs. Savannah's hands had not escaped the fact that one of the images was blurred by the rain. The very door she had tried to close behind her, her secret life, was now torn off its hinges. All the evidence was there, and there was no turning back. She sat there until late into the night, crushed by grief and horror. When her consciousness finally cleared, she rose on trembling legs. She had to do something, at least find out the truth from Lucas. She didn't believe her husband, didn't want to believe him, but doubt stung her heart. Lucas hadn't told her anything about his father. He just died, and that was it. Could it be true? Had he used her? No, it wasn't true, but she'd have to check. Savannah walked carefully into Emily's bedroom. The girl was asleep, hugging her teddy bear, her quiet breathing giving off a childish calm. Savannah felt a pang of pain. Was she really going to lose her treasure? This could not be allowed. She leaned down and kissed her daughter's warm forehead, whispering, "Forgive me, darling. Mommy needs to sort something out." While Edward was in his room, Savannah quietly went downstairs, threw her coat over her nightgown, and left the house. She needed to see Lucas now. The doors would not close again tonight. It was cold and windy outside. Savannah hurriedly got into the car, warming the steering wheel with her trembling hands. A single tear was running down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. She didn't have the strength. Through the fog in her eyes, the lights of the night city seemed like blurred ghosts. She drove along the almost empty streets automatically, still hearing her husband's stinging whisper in her ears, "Shut up, Savannah," and seeing his face distorted with rage in front of her. But behind these terrible pictures, another image arose: Lucas's face, confused and worried, as she saw him the last time. She needed to hear the truth from him now, before she went crazy with guesses. Lucas swung the door open before Savannah could knock. He looked disheveled and worried. "Savannah," he began, but stopped short when he noticed her condition. She stood there, pale, her eyes red from crying, wearing only a raincoat over her nightgown. In the cold light of the entryway, she looked like a ghost. He stepped back, letting her in, and closed the door. "What happened?" Lucas asked quietly, although his heart was already falling into the abyss of guesses. Savannah walked into the room and turned around abruptly. Her eyes were filled with anger, fear, and pain all at once. "I need to ask you," she answered, her voice breaking into a hoarse tone. "Lucas, right now, immediately tell me the truth. Why did you seek me out? Was this planned?" She almost shouted the last words, although her strength was leaving her. Lucas's face went pale. He rushed to her. "Savannah, honey, what happened? Your husband. Did he do something? Did he hurt you?" She flinched away from his attempt to touch her. "Don't you dare," she hissed. "Don't touch me. Just answer me. Is it true that—" Her voice wavered, but she forced herself to blurt out, "That you originally intended to take revenge on me because of your father? That you set this up to humiliate Edward through me?" Lucas staggered as if struck. For a split second, fear flashed in his eyes, then his shoulders slumped. He ran a hand over his face, closing his eyes. The silence confirmed the worst. "So it's true," Savannah breathed, feeling the walls around her sway. She had to brace herself against the back of her chair. Lucas took a step closer, but she shot him a look that froze him in place. "Yes," he finally whispered. "True. Partly. Savannah, let me explain." "Partly." She smiled bitterly. "So it wasn't love at first sight at the bookshelf? Was it calculated? You knew who my husband was, right? You knew, and you took advantage." "At first, yes," Lucas blurted out, each word like a blade across his throat. "I knew who your husband was. I sought you out, on purpose. But, Savannah, listen, everything changed the moment we spoke. I really—" his voice wavered—"fell in love with you. It wasn't an act, I swear. I didn't think it would turn out this way." Savannah stared at him, unblinking, tears burning her eyes. "You didn't think so? What were you counting on, Lucas? That I'd sleep with you and my husband would lose his job, his reputation? Is that what you wanted?" "I didn't think about it," he said dully. "I hated him. For so many years. My father was no saint, but he wasn't a criminal either. He was made a scapegoat so that your husband could get a promotion. My father fell seriously ill in prison and died before he was released. When I accidentally found out that you were his wife, and I found out about it only a couple of years after graduation, when I came across an article about him, I became embittered. Yes, the plan was to make him suffer by destroying his perfect family. I tried to meet you, but—" Lucas closed his eyes. "I didn't imagine what you were like, that I would fall madly in love." Savannah chuckled nervously through her tears. "You speak beautifully, but it doesn't change anything. Everything that happened between us was a lie." "No," Lucas stepped towards her, holding out his hands. "It's not a lie. Yes, I'm guilty, terribly guilty, that I started everything with deception. But my feelings for you are true. What we went through, What I told you, everything is sincere. Believe me, I just... I was afraid to confess to you. Every day I wanted to, but I was afraid of losing you. And he was right to be afraid, she whispered, wiping away the tears that were streaming down her face with her palm. Because now I look at you and I understand that I don't know you. Was there ever that sincerity you were talking about? Or are you, like him, a skilled actor? You wrote to me that I gave you back the meaning of life. Her voice broke. What irony! In reality, it was you who took my life away. Lucas couldn't resist. He came closer, despite her anger. Don't say that. I'm ready to beg for forgiveness on my knees. He tried to take her hands, but she pulled away. Don't touch me, Savannah repeated hoarsely. My husband was right. He knew everything. He said you were just using me, and now you'll laugh and leave me. And really, her lips trembled, you got what you wanted. My family is destroyed. Edward will file for divorce, deprive me of my daughter. God, Emily. She covered her face with her hands. Hearing about his daughter, Lucas himself almost cried. He gently placed his hands on her shoulders, and this time she didn't flinch, too broken to resist. You won't be deprived of Emily, he said tensely. I won't let you. I'll hire the best lawyers, He stopped, and bitterness and despair distorted his face. Damn, this is all my fault. Savannah, I'm beyond forgiveness. She raised her head. Instead of weakness, ice was burning in her eyes. No, there is no forgiveness, she whispered. You destroyed everything, and I, stupid, fell in love. I thought it was a gift from fate meeting you. I dreamed that you would save me. She smiled bitterly. How wrong I was. Lucas felt a dagger in his heart at her words. He dropped his hands and shook his head, hating himself. You're right. I'm not who you thought I was. I'm not a savior, not a hero. God knows, I never intended to save you when I came into your life. I only thought of revenge. But then everything changed. You need to know that. I've never loved anyone the way I love you. And I still do. Even if you drive me away, even if you hate me, I'll still be here. I won't abandon you now when you're in trouble. I may not be a hero, but I will do everything to protect you and Emily. Savannah listened, and her heart broke in two. Part of her wanted to rush to him, to be comforted, to believe that everything would be okay. But another part of her, seared with the pain of deception, screamed that this man could not be trusted. She took a step back, breaking away from the light embrace. Protect, she echoed quietly. You are already protected. No more. If it weren't for you, if it weren't for your game, none of this would have happened. Edward, of course, is no gift, but at least I had a daughter, a home. And now I'm going to lose everything. Because of you. Don't say that. Please, Lucas begged. We'll figure something out. I'll fix it. I won't let him take your daughter away from you. Do you hear me? I have connections in the press. I can try to put pressure, and the public. If they find out how he treated you. Don't you dare, Savannah suddenly interrupted angrily, her eyes flashing. Don't you dare bring this up in public. The last thing I need is for Emily to read about it in the papers. Edward threatened to cause a scandal. If you do this, he'll destroy me for sure. It's easy for you to say you have nothing to lose, and her voice broke. I don't want anything anymore. Nothing. She sank into a chair, suddenly feeling completely empty. Her tears had dried up. Lucas timidly squatted down in front of her, trying to look into her face. Don't say that, my love. Please. Let's fight. We're together. We can do it, he whispered. Savannah shook her head, staring into space. There is no together, she said lifelessly. You ruined everything yourself, and it's too late to fix it. Edward will do it his way anyway. He'll take Emily away from me. Her voice wavered at the mention of her daughter's name, but she continued, and I can't even fight. I have no money, no connections. And you're right about that, is that fair? But life isn't fair, apparently. It's time to get used to it. I'll be with you, Lucas repeated hotly. I'll find a way to help. No need for money, I'll sell the apartment, take out a loan, and hire a lawyer. I'll shout to the whole world, if necessary, that Edward Hart is a domestic tyrant. Stop it, Savannah said tiredly. She stood up, and Lucas did too. Don't make it worse. You've done more than enough. You know what I want more than anything right now? For you to leave me, just go away, and disappear from my life. Lucas turned pale. You don't want that. I want to, she met his gaze firmly, because every minute with you reminds me of how painfully you betrayed me. I can't now. I can't look at you. I need to think about my daughter, about how to live on, and not about your apologies. I won't leave, he breathed out, tears glistening on his eyelashes. I can't. Then I'll go, Savannah decided. She headed for the door, but he rushed after her. Where? It's late at night. You can't go home, he's there. Stay here, I'll sleep on the floor. Do whatever you want, just don't leave like that. She turned to him with such longing that he froze. Lucas, it's too late. It's over. We can't be together. You know that. I've lost everything, and maybe I deserve it. But I have to try to save Emily at least. And you, please, don't write to me. Don't call. Just disappear. The last words came with difficulty. Her throat constricted with pain, but she turned away and, gathering her will into a fist, threw open the door. I won't disappear, he threw after her desperately. I'll still be there. I'll prove to you that I love you. I'll prove. But the door had already slammed shut. Lucas stood there in the empty apartment, the only sound in the silence being his ragged breathing. He hung his head, clasped his hands behind his head, and shook with the silent scream he hadn't let out. Ghosts of the past stared at him from the plate-glass windows, his father, his mother, now Savannah. Everyone he had let down. There was no full trial or loud scandal. Edward Hart preferred to resolve matters quietly, without prying eyes. The very next day after the nightmarish night, he presented Savannah with a package of divorce papers through his lawyer. The terms were merciless, written in cold legal language, as if they were talking about dividing property and not about a living child. Sole custody of the daughter remained with the father, the property with him. She was only offered to sign and disappear from their lives. In exchange, Edward promised to save face, that is, not to air dirty laundry in the press, and allow her to occasionally see Emily under supervision. Savannah sat in the empty living room, pen in hand, staring at the papers spread out before her. Her cold, patient lawyer stood next to her, waiting for her decision. It was sunny outside, a deceptively peaceful day that belied the world crumbling within her. To sign would mean agreeing that she was unworthy of being a mother. Not to sign would condemn her daughter to a public scandal and an unpredictable war, the outcome of which would still be decided by one judge, Edward's friend. Savannah tried to consult with another lawyer, but the best firms in the city refused to take her case upon learning her husband's last name. She understood she really had no chance. Her hand shook as she signed the neat lines, effectively depriving herself of her daughter. Everything blurred before her eyes. The lawyer gathered the papers and dryly wished her good luck. Her betrayal did not surprise him at all. Hart's lawyers had prepared template solutions for such cases. Savannah was simply the guilty party, nothing more. The judge, who had known Edward for a long time, signed the divorce and custody decree practically in private. The verdict on the Hart family was passed behind closed doors, without witnesses, and without the right to object. Savannah went upstairs. Emily was playing with her dolls on the rug in the nursery, singing a song. At the sound of the door opening, the girl raised her head and smiled. "Mom!" Her smile faded as she saw her mother's face. Savannah walked in, her heart breaking. "Honey, we need to talk," she said quietly, sitting down next to her. Emily nodded seriously. She was smart beyond her years and could already sense the tension emanating from the adults. "Did you have a fight with your dad? He's angry," the girl whispered. Savannah fought back tears. "No, honey. It just so happened that Mom won't be able to live here for a while. But I'll visit you, I promise. Very often, and you can always call me." Emily's lips trembled. "Are you leaving? Because you're sad all the time? I promise to listen well. Just stay, Mommy." Her voice broke. Savannah pulled her daughter into a hug, holding her close. Baby, it's not your fault, okay? And mommy isn't abandoning you. It's just the way it is. It's best for everyone. Please listen to Daddy, and remember, I always love you more than life itself. Emily's cheeks were wet with tears. I love you too, Mommy. Don't go, she sobbed, clinging to her sweater with her little hands. Savannah didn't have the heart to unclench those fingers, but she heard a sullen cough behind her. Edward was standing in the doorway, his arms crossed. It's time, he said quietly but firmly. Savannah gently pushed her daughter away, stroking her head. I'll come back to you, honey, I promise, she whispered, standing up and walking past her husband, trying not to meet his eyes. He stepped back, letting her pass. A small suitcase was waiting for her downstairs. Edward had apparently packed his wife's things in advance. Savannah put on her coat, feeling lifeless. Her gaze briefly caught on the door frame. How many times had she left through this door, knowing she would return, but not now. Behind her, she heard the patter of bare feet. Emily ran out onto the stairs. Mommy, she cried out in despair. Savannah couldn't take it anymore. She rushed back and hugged her daughter one last time. Remember, honey, Mommy loves you, she whispered through her tears, then resolutely stood up and walked out the door before her strength left her completely. The door slammed behind her, the same door that had separated her from the world for so many years. Now she was on the other side, without keys, without an address, without a purpose. Behind her, behind the locked door, was her heart and her life, a little girl named Emily. Savannah stood on the porch, trying to collect her thoughts. She had only some cash and her phone in her coat pocket. She didn't want to dial any numbers. Her pride and pain were holding her back. With one last look at the house, she turned and walked down the street, not paying attention to where she was going. No one stopped her. The verdict was in effect, no appeals, no jury. It had been a month since Savannah had left her home. She had spent the last few days bouncing from one cheap hotel to another, trying not to stay in one place for long. She had changed her SIM card without telling anyone the new number. She had a meager savings account in her name, which she carefully withdrew in small increments to cover her food bill. She had no particular plan. She would wake up in the mornings in other people's rented rooms, cramped, damp-smelling motel rooms, and lie there for a long time, staring at the ceiling, asking herself why get up. Sometimes she walked around the city for hours without a goal or a route. She looked indifferently at shop windows, the faces of passers-by, the lights of street lamps. Life around her went on as usual. The only thought was beating in her head, just not to think about her own pain. But the thoughts did not lag behind. During the day, Emily's sad face stood before her eyes, stretching out her arms to her. At night, she dreamed of an angry Edward, then a broken Lucas. She woke up in a cold sweat, swallowing a scream. Life turned into a series of deserted streets, strange walls, and sleepless nights. One day, when she was renting a room on the outskirts, the landlady knocked on her door and said that a young man was asking for her. Savannah's heart ached. She guessed who it was. She told her to say that she was not there. But late at night, going out for groceries, she ran into Lucas at the entrance. He was waiting, despite the rain, soaking wet. You found me, she said tiredly, stopping 2 steps away. Lucas looked at her, exhausted, pale, and guilt twisted his face. I'm sorry, I was worried. I had to make sure you were safe. Savannah, please don't push me away. Let me help you. She closed her eyes. Go away, Lucas. I don't have the strength to fight with you anymore, but it's hard to see you too. He stepped closer under the awning, hiding from the drizzling rain. I understand, but let me do something. Do you have a place to live? Money? You're alone. You must be scared. Savannah smiled bitterly. Are you scared? I'm not scared of anything anymore. Everything I was afraid of has already happened. There's nothing left to lose. Lucas was silent, not knowing what to say. She looked at him straight in the eye. You want to help? Then leave me. Just leave me. It will be better this way. For whom? He whispered. For you? For Emily, do you think that if you disappear, everyone will feel better? Don't disappear, I beg you. Lucas covered her cold hand with his palm. I'm afraid for you. You're alone. You can get sick, something can happen to you, and no one will know. Savannah looked down at his fingers, squeezing her wrist. The warmth of his hand reminded her of old times, how he had held her hand in the cafe, how he had promised support. A lump formed in her throat. What could happen to me? She asked quietly. The worst has already happened. Don't worry about me. Better, better think about your own life. You have so much ahead of you, don't waste it on my lost soul. Don't say that, Lucas shook his head. You're not dead. You're alive, okay? You've been through things that would break anyone, but you've survived. You're the strongest woman I know. Savannah shook her head weakly. You're wrong. I'm broken, and I'm not going to get back together. She carefully pulled her hand away. Please, go away. I need to learn to live again alone, and it's painful to see you. My heart breaks every time. There's no better way. Lucas struggled between wanting to hug her and knowing she was right. He took a step back. I won't bother you anymore if that's what you want. But can I ask, what are you going to do next? Savannah shrugged. I don't know. Live by inertia. Rent corners until the money runs out, and then... She said terrible things in an indifferent tone. Maybe I'll go somewhere. Wash dishes in a diner on the highway. No name, no past. Lucas winced. You deserve so much better. He paused, then asked carefully, have you thought about going back to writing? You've started writing something. It could be your life's work, huh? Savannah smiled sadly. The only thing I write now is a diary. I write down everything that happened, as if I were telling myself on paper. Otherwise, my thoughts would tear me apart from within. That's good, Lucas said softly. It may be a diary, but maybe it will become a book. You could publish your story, without names if you want, but people will read it and hear your voice. Isn't that important? Savannah shrugged. Maybe, someday. I'm not ready to think about it yet. She looked into his eyes, fighting back the inner tremor. Goodbye, Lucas. Thank you for everything, and I'm sorry. Don't say goodbye, he shook his head, his eyes shining. I believe we'll meet again, Savannah. And know this, I always love you. She didn't answer. She just turned around and disappeared into the entryway, leaving him alone in the drizzling rain. That night she cried for a long time. But in the morning, for the first time in a long time, she picked up a pen and paper, not out of pain, but with a purpose. She opened a fresh notebook and wrote the title on the first page, Be Quiet, Savannah. That would be the title of her book, the story of a woman who was forced to remain silent. Now this woman would speak from the pages. Savannah wrote days and nights on end, pouring out onto paper the whole truth about her life under the guise of a novel. It was a confession, a cry, an attempt to reach out to her daughter, to the world, to herself. A few months later, the manuscript was complete. The scribbled notebooks and printed pages lay in a pile on a rickety table in yet another rental. Savannah felt strangely empty and relieved. She had done all she could. Now all that was left was to get her work out there where it could be read. Savannah carefully packed the manuscript into an envelope. The title page was credited as S. Hart. She didn't hide her initials. Along with the manuscript, she included a short letter. The addressee was the only person she could trust with her truth, Lucas James. That same day, she sent the parcel by courier, and that evening she left the city, leaving no friends, no enemies, no address. She became a ghost, a woman without an address, who one day, perhaps, will cease to exist altogether. But her story will remain. A year after she disappeared, Savannah Hart found her voice in a book. The novel, titled Shut Up, Savannah, was published without much publicity in a small print run by an independent publisher. But once the first readers opened it, word spread quickly. The story of a mysterious woman, written with piercing sincerity, shook the hearts of many. The book quickly shot to the top of bestseller lists. Critics vied with each other to praise the debut of an unknown writer. a voice breaking through the silence of pain, wrote one reviewer. A confession that is impossible to tear yourself away from, echoed another. Readers shared quotes on social networks. The phrase in the epigraph was especially memorable. When you are told to be silent, it is time to speak. No one knew for sure who the author with the initials SH was. There were rumors that the story was not made up. The emotions and details seemed too vivid. A year-old story surfaced in the press about the missing wife of District Attorney Hart. Some guessed about the connection between these events and the novel. Edward Hart himself refused to comment. He retained full custody of his daughter and continued his career, but his once impeccable reputation was tarnished by the shadow of the scandal he tried to hush up. Lucas James kept the promise he made to himself, not to disappear from Savannah's life. And even though she was not there, he did everything to ensure that her book saw the light of day. It was he who edited the manuscript, persuaded a publisher he knew to take a risk and publish it. When the first copy finally came out, Lucas sat with the book in his hands for a long time, not daring to open it. He was afraid to dive back into her world, a world that he had unwittingly destroyed. Finally, he made up his mind. Page after page, he read, holding his breath. Savannah's words, artistic, yet so recognizable, penetrated right under his skin. Between the lines, he heard Savannah's living voice. They wanted to silence me, but my silence learned to scream in the void. If my daughter ever reads these words, let her know I always loved her, and lovingly I left so as not to hurt her. This truth was bitter, painful, but there was liberation hidden in it. Lucas read and cried, not ashamed of his tears. It was her truth, bitter, painful, but liberating. On the last pages, the heroine said goodbye to her daughter and went into the unknown. The book ended almost without hope, but at the very end, Savannah added a dedication. Dedicated to Eb, someday you will read and know the truth. Love you, forever your mom. Lucas closed the book, swallowing salty drops. He knew Eb was Emily Brown Hart, her daughter. Savannah wrote this story for her. More time passed. The novel, Shut Up, Savannah, continued to break records. People looked for answers in it and found sympathy. But the question of Savannah's fate remained open. Where is she now? Is she alive? Some readers wrote letters to the publisher, hoping to reach the author. There was no answer. One day, Lucas left a bookstore where a readers' meeting had just taken place to discuss the novel. He walked down a noisy New York street, holding a fresh magazine under his arm with an interview he had given about the book as its literary confidant. In the magazine, a journalist asked questions about the enigmatic writer, but Lucas answered evasively, only repeating that the author had wanted to remain anonymous. The main thing is the book itself, he said. It gave a voice to those who had long been silent. When asked directly whether the novel was based on real events, Lucas said, "There is always a share of fiction in every true story and a lot of truth in every fiction." These words were later used as the headline of the article. Suddenly, he noticed a female silhouette in a raincoat among the crowd. His heart jumped for a moment. He thought he saw a familiar face. The brunette with sad eyes looked straight at him for a few seconds. Lucas froze, but passers-by blocked his view. When the stream dissipated, the woman was gone. He looked around, hoping that this was not a figment of his imagination. There was a bookmark lying on the sidewalk at his feet, apparently fallen out of a book. Lucas picked it up and turned it over. On the plain cardboard rectangle was a quote, "Don't be afraid to speak, even if your voice is a whisper." At the bottom, in small print, was the title of the book, Silence, Savannah. Lucas clutched the bookmark to his chest and sighed softly. He wasn't sure if the woman was Savannah or if he just desperately wanted her to be. But he knew one thing. Her voice, long suppressed, was now loud. And that voice would never go away. It would live on as long as people read her story. The evening gilding was falling on the city, blurring the shadows of the buildings and turning the windows of the Laurel Cafe into glowing squares of amber. The cafe stood on a quiet side street just off the university campus, a place where the noise of students by morning was only an echo in the memory of the cobblestones. Emily Hart, now a 20-year-old freshman studying psychology, crossed the street, clutching her bag of notes to her fingers tapping nervously on the strap. The previous morning, a thick cream envelope had been in her mailbox, no return address, no stamps, just a neat ink inscription. Come to Laurel, Wednesday, 7 p.m. Inside is a thin sheet of paper folded in half and one phrase written in the same handwriting. I am your mother. I have always been there. Will you forgive me? I don't know, but I need our meeting. Emily had been walking in circles for almost a day before she made up her mind. Now she pushed the glass door, and the warm smell of cinnamon, coffee, and vanilla gently embraced her. The room was half empty. A barista was chatting at the counter. An elderly professor was leafing through a newspaper at a corner table. Only one place seemed torn from the familiar picture, a table by the window, where a woman in a light gray coat was sitting. Her palms were folded on a thin cup. On her finger, a simple, as if deliberately inconspicuous ring. Emily had only seen the woman in old photographs, but she recognized her immediately. The same brown eyes that had looked out from the album photos, the same dark blonde curls, even though they were now streaked with gray. At the sight of the girl, the woman slowly stood up. Emily, it sounded almost like a whisper, but distinct, as if the name had sprouted in the air itself. The girl's lips trembled. The pause stretched out, one endless second, as past and present and 1,000 unasked questions collided like rushing streams under thin ice. Emily sat down opposite her, her gaze sliding over her face, where anxiety and timid hope were reflected. Please sit down, Savannah said, her voice calmer than expected, but there were small bells of tension ringing in it. When the waitress brought a pitcher of water and 2 cups, the young woman nodded her thanks slightly, and then, as if on stage with a flash of light, she began to speak. I have no right to expect anything from you except, perhaps, contempt and rage. But still, you have finally become an adult, and you have the right to this meeting and to hear the whole story firsthand, without rumors, without someone else's interpretations. Savannah exhaled, looking down at her mug. The thick, toasted foam rippled like the surface of a pond on a windy day. I watched your life. From the first day I left. Not in person, I couldn't afford that. But I knew the titles of every school play you did, read newspaper articles about your sports victories, found a video of you singing at a Christmas concert. I stood at the very back of the hall among the parents of the neighboring school when you received your diploma, and I cried so that no one would see. It was my way of being there, at least like that. Emily clenched her fingers under the table. Why? Her voice was quiet but firm. Why watch from the sidelines when you could? Come. Savannah flinched slightly. Because I was afraid. Afraid that your father would rather destroy me before your eyes than allow us to communicate again. I had lost the legal right to even a few hours of contact a month. You were too young to remember the details. I could have fought, but every attempt would have meant a loud, public trial. I knew Edward would make it hell for you, too. I chose silence. Your silence was my punishment. She looked up at her daughter. And then I was eaten away by guilt. I told myself, you'd rather grow up without me than in the center of scandals. I was afraid that my shadow would ruin your future. It's cowardice, I understand. Emily shook her head, as if trying to clear away the haze of images childhood nights, when she'd quietly cried into her pillow, receiving no explanation for why her mother had disappeared. Dad said then, Mom decided that she doesn't need us. And he also said that you had another man. He called you a traitor. Savannah closed her eyes, allowing herself to appear broken for a few seconds. Dad was right. I cheated on him. I won't make excuses. I made a terrible mistake. Even though the relationship was fleeting, it was this mistake that became the lever with which he turned our lives upside down. She took a small, thick folder out of her bag. On the cover were the faded initials SH. Inside are the letters I've written to you over the years. Each one is a confession. In one, I boldly reveal the reason. In another, I explain why I couldn't win the case. In a third, I tell you about the days I stood on the other side of the school stadium and watched you take penalties. Besides the letters, there's my address. I rent a small house by the ocean. If you want, come visit, even tomorrow. If not, leave everything as is." Emily ran her hand over the folder, the rustling of paper suggesting years of waiting. "I asked myself one question: why you left." She raised her eyes, and a mixture of anger and thirst for understanding splashed in them. "Was Dad really so terrible that you chose loneliness? Or was that man stronger than your love for me?" Savannah winced. "That man became my refuge from the emptiness. I was scared, crushed by my father's estrangement. He threatened to take everything from me, including you. I couldn't cope. Did that connection hold me back at all? No. It burned my bridges. I traded my family for the illusion of warmth, and I paid for it." She fell silent, collecting her words. "But do you know what's the worst thing? Your father could forgive betrayal, but he would never forgive freedom. He needed a perfect picture. I had to keep quiet." She smiled bitterly. The silence stretched. The switch on the coffee machine clicked above the barista counter. "What do you want now?" Emily finally asked. Savannah placed her palm on top of the folder. "I'm not asking for the impossible. I won't barge in with advice on how to live. But if you want, I'm here. I'm no longer bound by your father. His influence is gone. He left the prosecutor's office. I've earned enough to live in peace, but not in luxury. I have a garden, an old hydrangea, and a table under the pines where new stories are written. I'll reserve any corner of the house for you or not, if distance is important to you. You want my forgiveness." Emily said this without reproach, as a statement of fact. "I want to, but I understand I don't deserve it. Forgiveness is not a coin, it cannot be begged. I can only ask to be allowed to be present, at least to observe without secret fences. I have learned to love you quietly for 20 years, let me learn to love openly." She pulled out another envelope. It had the address of a coastal town and ferry dates. "If you ever feel ready, come. It rarely rains there, and the seagulls laugh so loudly that they drown out the fear." Emily touched the envelope, her hand shaking, either from excitement or from a vague joy she was afraid to admit. "One last thing," Savannah straightened up. "I have to give you some guidance, not because I'm a mother, but because I stumbled where you'll go." She spoke calmly, as if laying each syllable like a stone into a foundation. "Always finish an old story before opening a new one. Relationships are like books. You can't read two at once without losing the meaning. I once chose escape over an honest ending, and it turned out that I ruined not one life, but three at once. Don't be silent if it hurts. Silence seems like a shield, but turns into a cage. Talk to your partner about your fears, about your desires, even if your voice trembles. Don't mistake love for fragile grace. Being loved doesn't mean you have to pay with submission. Love yourself enough to walk away when you're broken. Forgiveness is an act of strength, not weakness. But you can use force as you wish. If you don't want to forgive, that's also your right." She fell silent. Emily stared at the woman who was now a ghost, now a rumor, for a long time. And suddenly she noticed. Her mother's shoulders were shaking a thin, shivery shudder, barely noticeable. It was not a pose, not a carefully constructed scene. It was a person. I don't know how to feel," the girl said finally. "For so many years, I've been drawing a monster and an angel in my head in turn. Now I see a real person, and it's difficult." Savannah nodded, as if she had already accepted any reaction. "I'm not expecting a decision now." Emily stood up, picked up the folder, and squeezed it so tightly that the binding spring creaked. "I need time," she said. "But I'll read it all. And then—" Savannah stood up too, an inch of air between them, full of memories that never happened. "Thank you for coming," the mother whispered. Emily nodded. "Thank you for inviting me." She was already taking a step towards the exit when she suddenly froze, turned around and rushed forward briefly, almost childishly. Their embrace was awkward. The bag was in the way, the coat had slipped off her shoulders, but they held each other as they would hold each other on the edge of a cliff if there was eternal emptiness behind them. A minute later, the girl was gone. Savannah stood in the dim light of the cafe, feeling a slight warmth in her palms, proof that the embrace had not been a dream. She stepped outside. The sky was seething with purple sunset. Her shadow flickered on the windshield of a parked car, a woman who was no longer a ghost. The phone in my pocket vibrated. Message, "We'll talk later. E." Savannah closed her eyes, and it was as if wings had opened over the noisy city light, but strong enough to lift both of them. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.